We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. This is Robert Phoenix and I'm broadcasting to you live from South Central Texas in the beautiful state capital known as Austin. It is pretty nice here today, about 80 degrees at showtime, a few puffy clouds in the sky, and the sky is blue overall. Had a very groovy weekend, as they say, although there was some chemtrail activity. They're getting very clever with the chemtrail spraying now. They're doing some pretty high-altitude stuff and mixing it in with the local cloud cover, which they've been doing for a while anyway, but they're getting quite good at it. It's almost like art, to be honest with you. So we had some of that over Austin skies this weekend, and it was incredibly hot yesterday, really hot. It's been an interesting weekend, interesting 48 hours, has it not? Since Friday of last week, the world is buzzing about one Edward Snowden, who has leaked what supposedly are quite serious classified documents about the NSA. I have some mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, it's good that people understand what's going on and that Snowden, whoever this guy is, has come forward to talk about the reach. Because I think the reach is noteworthy. It's everything. Right now, this radio broadcast is being picked up somewhere and filed away. And it has been from day one, I'll tell you that right now. And whether or not Blog Talk has anything to do with it, I don't know. I don't think so. Although you never know, right? Because even when you think you know, you never really know. But the fact of the matter is this is coming through a pipeline. It's going through my server, their server, but I'm also being connected to it through Skype, which is one packet, right? Skype is hooking us up. Skype owned by Microsoft. So there's another potential gateway to which the information can be called. I'm online here through my own wireless connection. That's Time Warner. And then there's Blog Talk, and then there's any number of packets in between that can be set up to grab any stream that we're talking about, which means that there's a very good chance that not only this program, but almost any other program on Blog Talk Radio, no matter how political or innocuous it is recorded. Everything is recorded, and everything's been recorded since the 1980s. This is the way it is. The big news in the 90s was a fellow by the name of Danny Casolaro, and Danny Casolaro had created a program based on keywords called Promise, the Promise technology and software. Danny Casolaro was into privacy security. He was an independent contractor. He was not a hacker, but he was eventually co-opted. His promised technology was co-opted, taken from him, and then Danny Casolaro wound up being killed, dead, as a result of this. And there is a new program that came out of Promise called Echelon, and Echelon is a very super sophisticated program that essentially is like bots, for lack of better terminology, bots or spiders crawling around the web and looking for keywords. This is kind of what, in some ways, Cliff High's technology is based on, but perhaps even more super sophisticated than that. And any keyword that shows up, whether it's in a text, whether it's in a video or broadcast, is immediately grabbed and filed away, and that information, that chunk, is downloaded. We're talking about huge, massive supercomputers doing parallel processing 24/7. This is where it's at, ladies and gentlemen. And what's happened since 9/11 is that the veils, or not even the veils, the controls, whatever controls there were, because there was some measure of control prior to 9/11 in the Patriot Act. There were things you had to go through. You had to get warrants. If you did wiretapping without a warrant, it wasn't admissible in a court of law. If you did wiretapping, you could use that information to somehow impact an individual or what they were doing, but it just wouldn't have any legal ballast or gravitas, because there was no judicial or legal justification for it. But once 9/11 happened and the Patriot Act was put into place, all that stuff pretty much went away. And what was ramping up during or pre-9/11, and trust me, the whole security state, since the 1980s, has been very much in high gear. But after 9/11, it was given the green light. And so the broad scale of what was able to be done since then has been multiplied probably by the power of 100. And it was pretty loose pre-9/11, and post-9/11, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. Now, what we have come to understand over the course of the last few days was the role that Verizon has played. And we've known about Verizon since the early 2000s, around 2003, 2004, where it was found that Verizon had a small room dedicated to one of their servers, one of their main servers, and that small room was a private room, and it was a room that was only accessible by government employees, where they were tapping directly into Verizon's phone lines. So Verizon has been a key player in the surveillance society that we're now currently living in. And so this came out recently, but we've known this for quite a while now. We've known this about Verizon since 2003, and they haven't stopped. None of the phone companies have stopped. All the phone companies are complicit here, because if they're not complicit, things can get very hard for them. These are corporations, and corporations are subject to government review, so they're going to play ball. They're going to give up their information. Why? Because they can have their tax breaks, and they won't be hassled by the IRS and all this other stuff, right? I mean, they won't go to the SEC and be reviewed. It's part of the game. So they're all in on it. It doesn't matter who you have, whether it's T-Mobile, whether it's Sprint, AT&T, doesn't matter. Verizon may be the most egregious of the bunch, but nobody is clean when it comes to offering up their goods and services, so to speak. Then there's the whole issue of people like Apple and Google and Facebook, who are also in on the game and giving up tranches of data consistently. You throw Yahoo in on the pile as well. Yahoo, and I talked about this I think on Friday's show. Yahoo is going to require their users to opt in on an agreement for their new Yahoo Mail, which will allow Yahoo to scale every single email that comes through Yahoo. So this is not something that's just kind of a local one-off. Everybody's playing ball at this point and sharing and divulging information. And one of the things that Edward Snowden, and we're going to get into him a little bit as an individual and as a figure and whether or not he's legit, because there are some people who have some doubts about who he is and why he's doing this. And it's always good to ask those questions. We are so quick to want to, prop somebody up as a hero or a martyr or whatever title they deserve when it comes to standing up for the truth or doing the right thing, which in our society doesn't happen nearly enough. And if it does, we certainly don't hear about it. But we're going to get into him in a little bit and try to craft and derive some sort of profile around who he is, where he came from, and where all this might be headed. By the way, apparently he's on the run now. He was in Hong Kong. He's no longer at his hotel, so he is theoretically a fugitive, and this storyline is not going to go away. It's going to be worth following over the next few days and maybe weeks, depending upon what happens to him and what the federal government here in the United States wants to do with him. He talked about trying to seek asylum in Iceland, and Iceland has a new administration which is much more conservative than in the past, and wanting to hang out more with the United States and be kind of more in the mix there. So I don't think Iceland is going to be an option for him. So who knows? Maybe he'll wind up in North Korea. You never know. You never know with these things. But we're going to look at him in a little bit as we go further down the rabbit hole with Edward Snowden, NSA leaker. One of the things that was being brought up on John Rappaport's site, if you don't know who John Rappaport is, you should find him, seek him out. He's always on point. He deals in facts, and he's not afraid to get in and roll up his sleeves and mix it up. One of the things that Rappaport pointed out was the connection between two Israeli companies as they relate to Verizon. And the Israeli companies are, these two Israeli companies, one of which is named Verint. They are really intertwined with this whole surveillance society and this whole surveillance community and this whole surveillance industry. You can go back to the Stasi in just post-World War II in East Germany, and the Stasi they were the states, and they were the entity that was perfecting this art of surveillance and listening in on people. So this whole idea and this whole notion of surveillance and creating dossiers and profiles has been going on since post-World War II. So what they've been doing is they've been increasing the amplitude, and they've been increasing the efficiency around this. None of those things went away. I mean, you don't spend from 1946 to roughly, 1990? That's 34 years? 34 years. You don't spend that time. That should be 44 years, wouldn't it? Yeah, 44 years. You don't spend 44 years and create this massive network and this infrastructure for spying on people and just chuck it. You cherry pick the best of it, and then you import the technology. And it seems as though the Israelis are the ones that have their fingers on the pulse right now, and are in between almost every surveillance transaction that takes place. I noted on Facebook earlier today, there's a thread happening on Facebook, and a good thread. I posted Snowden's interview with Glenn Greenwald, and one of the people who are my Facebook friends, she basically said, "Hey, he's a shill. He's another shill." So I'm open. I want to find out, and peel back the layers and say, okay, well, because I really hadn't made any kind of assumption about Edward Snowden quite yet, because we're in a place right now where we really want to jump, right? We really want to grab that bait and say, this is it. This is it. I wrote about this, by the way, at my blog last week, that we're all waiting for the gotcha of gotcha moments. So this is kind of, is this the gotcha moment? Is this what we've all been, quote unquote, waiting for? Or is it a gotcha moment that's really a Trojan horse? What is really being revealed? Is it the fact that we're being spied on and there's nothing you can do about it? Is it the fact that, this is the way it is and the way it will be? Is it to demoralize people? Is it to create more outrage? Is it to create more divide and conquer and fracture us? I mean, what is really the end game here? Is it a limited hang? Is Edward Snowden a straw man? I mean, these are all really important things to think about. Now, in the grand scheme of things, let's play along, all right? Let's say this was a massive kind of psyop to unleash the Edward Snowden meme onto the public. And as a result of that, people become A, more cynical, B, more outraged, C, more impotent, because what can we do theoretically? What can we do? Occupy the NSA? Are we all going to go to the NSA building and occupy the NSA? What about that fusion center in Utah? Are we going to occupy the fusion center? I mean, what can we do about it? Well, theoretically, our people in Congress and in the Senate, primarily Congress, are supposed to be there for us. Now, they're getting everything grabbed. Every phone call they make, every email they have, that's getting grabbed. And that can be, used against them. I mean, we've already seen this. This has already come out. We've seen the surveillance around the AP material. That's come out. I mean, there's tons and tons of stuff that's being leaked right now. So the question is why? Why? Now, there could be, here's a possible scenario, that there are two factions that are fighting it out inside of our government right now. When we talked about this on the show before, this goes all the way back to Atlantis, Sons of Belial, Law of One. One group says, hey, humanity can't manage itself. Humanity can't even wipe its own ass. That, by the way, would be the Sons of Belial. The Law of One says, hey, give humanity a break. Give them enough rope here. Let's see what they can do. Let's lighten up. They can manage their own affairs. So theoretically, these two groups have been in conflict with one another since the time of Atlantis. And that, by the way, those groups are star groups, Orion and Sirius. Orion being the Sons of Belial, Sirius being the Law of One. So perhaps this is a manifestation of that conflict taking place. And this is perhaps a Law of One subterfuge. Now, that might actually have some merit, as you'll see in a little bit, when I begin to unveil just slightly who Edward Snowden is and what some of his associations are. It's just starting to come to light. I don't have a full profile, but I'm going to put some pieces together, okay? So that is one possible scenario, that we're seeing two factions fight it out, and this is the latest Law of One strategy being implemented against the Sons of Belial. Now, there could be another component to this, which is that Edward Snowden isn't who he says he is. He's not what he says he is, and he's actually an agent, and he's there to destabilize more. He's there to create more of a sense of cynicism, and believe it or not, he might even be there to bring this out into the open so that this whole debate is legitimized. And I mentioned this before, earlier, but one of the things that Obama has said, which has got to be it's completely asinine. It's completely asinine. I'm sorry. I'm being a little hard on the commander-in-chief. But he said that we don't listen in on your phone calls. That's ridiculous. Who can believe that? And then the most important thing is he says that, well, you've got to give up some freedom and privacy for security. This is what's coming out of this. So people are starting to, look at this and deal with this as it is being framed and offered up by the current administration. And of course, people like Dianne Feinstein and all these other quote-unquote public servants are coming forward and saying, oh, but this has helped foil so many terrorist attacks you don't even know. Well, of course we don't know. Of course we don't know. And it's really, in a lot of ways, a disingenuous statement. Because if you peel back the terrorist attacks, or the ones that we've seen and been shown, they're on shaky ground in terms of legitimacy. How many false flags can we see flying around these events? So maybe, just maybe, the surveillance has stopped real terror attacks and allowed the not so real terror attacks to come to the fore. I don't know what the story is as it relates to the supposed terror attacks. What I do know is that the war on terror is a manufactured war, and it's a war without end. That's where it's at. That's the way it is. And if you don't think otherwise, well, good luck on that, because that's all we're getting ad nauseum 24/7. There's no conflicts anymore in the world. There's no wars anymore. There's no reason to war. There's no reason to go to battle. If there are wars, they might be economic wars, they might be currency wars, they may be cyber optic wars. You know, I mean, this is kind of where conflict exists at this point in time. But at a high level, they're all working together. They're all working together towards one goal, and that is a one world order. And so while the one world order is trying to take shape and form and coalesce, then there has to be a series of divisions and a series of conflicts in order to keep people divided and conquered on one level, to drain resources. The allocation of resources is enormous. And so we have this war on terror, this phony war on terror. I'm sorry, I'm saying for what it is. So it's a bogus war. You know, how can we trust these people who, on the one hand, are they're reprimanding Al Qaeda, and they're claiming that Al Qaeda is a terrorist group, but on the other hand, they're meeting with Al Qaeda in Syria with John McCain. How do we reconcile this? We can't reconcile it because it's unreconcilable. It is really the Gordian knot of the enigma that we're faced with. We're faced with something that is manufactured. It is a synthetic conflict. And to say that all the surveillance has kept us from being assaulted or attacked by terrorists is likely very disingenuous, because the terrorists, as we know them, don't even really exist. Okay, I'm just being really upfront right now. But what's going to happen now is that the greater debate in the public won't be about what I'm talking about. It's going to be about what's perceived, and it's going to be about what people can handle, because most people can't handle what I'm talking about. They just can't. I'm a conspiracy theorist, I'm a tin hatter, you name it, you know, slap the label across my lips. But unfortunately, this is the dialogue that we need to have. This is the deeper dialogue. It's not necessarily about surveillance, although it's a big, big piece. It's about what's behind it. It's about what we are being theoretically protected from, all in the wake of 9/11. Now, perhaps we can have a moment in time in the not-so-distant future where the Patriot Act is revisited, and some of these draconian, and I mean draconian measures, can be rescinded. But the cat, boys and girls, the cat is out of the bag. Just because there is going to be perhaps one or two measures in the Patriot Act that might be watered down a little bit, this is not going away. There's way too much money invested in surveillance. It is a huge industry. And the reason why surveillance has become so prominent over the course of the last 12 years, and even before then to a large extent, but really post 9/11, the reason why surveillance has become such a big deal is because there's no more jobs. The jobs now are in people watching people. It's not about making things anymore. It's about people watching people. That's what you have when you have too much time in your hands, not enough production, and in some ways, too much capital that's being lubricated through the system. So now you have, for all intents and purposes, a virtual prison economy, because that's what it's become. You know, we are living in a prison, and the surveillance state are the prison guards. Now they're imperceptible, but they are. And really, who are they? You know, who really are they? Are they adjuncts to the NSA? Are they Israeli state surveillance corporations that have been integrated in between the government groups and the alphabet agencies and the communications industry? Are they the Law of One? Or are they Sons of Belial? Who are they really? I'll tell you who they are. They're us. That's who they are. They're us. They are the parts of ourselves manifest who jail us. They're our own internal prison guards being manifest in the world. That's what it's all about. That's what we're seeing. That's why it exists. Because this is really an alchemical moment in time. You know, we had John Trudell on the show on Friday. If you haven't listened to the show, I highly recommend that you do. There's some really great information. And you know, I asked John about these NSA leaks. It really hadn't come to light what was happening, but we knew that there was a lot going on with the Guardian UK that was getting a story every day about some part of the government here in the United States that was up to no good. And then it really broke on Saturday when Snowden's identity was revealed, and the Guardian UK was the one that did it. But I had John on the show, and I asked him, you know, John was part of the American Indian movement, which was a pretty radical activist group in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And there were people like Dennis Banks and Russell Means and John himself and Leonard Pelletier. And they were under surveillance all the time because they were classified as dangerous. So I asked him about it, and he says, well, if you're surprised, he says, you know, he basically said, I'd be surprised if you're surprised. That's what he said. And he immediately kind of went from the quaint notion of freedom, which, you know, we're all trying to kind of uphold and understand and grasp. He went from freedom to responsibility. And he talked about being responsible for your thoughts, your actions, you know, what you do, where you're going, who you are. And he reframed the whole thing. So I think that if anything could come out of this is that we are now becoming perhaps more aware, more conscious, and more clear about the bigger picture and what this means, especially as it relates to consciousness. Because at some level, we have to be responsible enough in our own lives, and that's a challenge for every single one of us for many different reasons, but we have to be responsible in our own lives so that we can fire the prison guards, that we don't need them anymore. And this is really where the true struggle exists. And when enough of us get to that point, then what will happen likely is that the matrix or the manifestation of the matrix will change and will alter itself. And I'm beginning to feel that this is already happening. Now, you may poo-poo Edward Snowden. You may think that he's a shill or, you know, or he's a straw man. But I'm going on record right here and now that this is significant. Whether you think it's going to be used and manipulated to legitimize spying, legitimize surveillance, or more divide and conquer, or take down Obama for, you know, the next plastic man. I don't really care, you know, to that extent. I mean, I do care to some extent, but it's not really my main focus. My main focus here is that this is significant, and this is a significant event as it relates to a reflection of our consciousness. You cannot sit back in all of your cynicism and say this is just a ploy. This is meaningful. Now, what you do with it and what it means to you is a whole other thing. But in my world, this is some kind of gradient marker that the game is changing, and that the efforts of people to wake up are becoming manifest in an event like this. All right, so what I want to do is I want to play a little music, and when I get back, I'm going to get into Edward Snowden a little bit. We're going to look at him, where he comes from, and a surprising affiliation. Well, perhaps not surprising on some level, but on another level, there are people that might be very intrigued by what I'm about to share with you. All right, what do I want to play here? I got busted by YouTube for playing a licensed track, and I don't want that to happen again. I don't want YouTube on my case. Why don't we let's just do something really short. Let's just do testing 1, 2, 3, Michael V. Hill. It's Monday. Let's get that fiery, hard rock, jazz, fusion guitar lit up and get you going here early in this week. Michael V. Hill, testing 1, 2, 3. I'll be back in 3 minutes and 6 seconds with more interesting factoids about Edward Snowden. That was testing 1, 2, 3 by Michael V. Hill, UFO experiencer, and Anunnaki contact. So let's get into Edward Snowden a little bit. This is an interesting little tidbit here by the Associated Press that is on Yahoo, and it's called 5 Things to Note About NSA Surveillance Programs. So the programs, it says here, the programs, the NSA has been collecting the phone records of hundreds of millions of Americans each day, creating a database through which it can learn whether terrorist suspects have been in contact with people in the U.S. While the NSA program does not listen to actual conversations, the revelation of the program reopened the post-9/11 debate about privacy concerns versus heightened measures to protect against terrorist attacks. Separately, an internet scouring program codenamed PRISM allows the NSA and FBI to tap directly into 9 U.S. internet companies to gather all internet usage, audio, video, photographs, emails, and searches. The effort is designed to detect suspicious behavior that begins overseas. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This is a brief profile on Edward Snowden. He's a 29-year-old high school dropout, and he worked for the consulting giant Booz Allen Hamilton. So so Snowden joined the Army, and he wanted to be a special forces guy so that he could help the Iraqi people. That was his motivation. He's a high school dropout. He joined the Army and wanted to be a special forces guy. He jumped out of a plane. He broke both legs. So he was done with that. And then after he broke both his legs, he got a job as a security guard for an intelligence facility in Maryland. So that's where he started. He started as a security guard. And then he wound up later joining the CIA. And he was posted under diplomatic cover in Geneva, Switzerland. And then after that, he worked for consulting companies and claims he spent 4 years working as a contractor with the NSA. And he'd worked with Booz Allen Hamilton for less than 3 months. And that was in Hawaii. He went from Hawaii to Hong Kong, where all of this came about. Now, what's really interesting about him is, check this out. This is where it gets a little fascinating here. And the implications are potentially, I wouldn't say explosive, but if people begin to link the two things together, obviously a certain type of profile can be created about who Snowden is and the type of people that he influences. And in fact, he might even be considered a terrorist himself. Okay, that's the other piece here. So this is from RT, Russia Today, which some people trust, other people don't trust. I don't care. There's interesting information. You have to sort through it. You have to sort through agendas, blah, 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 blah. So this is just hot off the press. NSA leaker Snowden supported Ron Paul's presidential run. I'm going to read this to you verbatim here. As news continues to surface about classified NSA documents leaked last week, the man who blew the whistle on the secret spy program is quickly becoming the center of attention, with all eyes turned to 29-year-old Edward Snowden, the former CIA analyst who leaked documents about the National Security Agency's domestic spying. He is already on his way to becoming the most discussed man in America. Less than 24 hours after The Guardian went public with Snowden's identity on Sunday, the leaker's personal life and politics have already taken center stage. Now at the center of some discussions in Snowden's endorsement of Ron Paul during last year's presidential race, a revelation that is providing a rare glimpse into the ideologies of a man who will likely face decades in prison for going public. According to donation info published by the Center for Responsive Politics website, opensecrets.org, Snowden made 2 contributions totaling $500 to the presidential campaign of then Republican, then Representative Ron Paul during the last calendar year. Snowden made a $250 contribution to Representative Paul on March 18th and another $250 donation on May 6th. That's as much as he can make, by the way, and it is America, by the way. You can donate and pledge to anybody. Ron Paul was vying for the Republican Party's nomination as president during last year's election, ultimately losing that slot to former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. Paul ended his active campaigning phase shortly after Snowden's second contribution was made and retired from Congress in early 2013 after serving decades on Capitol Hill. Although other links between Snowden and Paul haven't been published yet, the leaker did say in an interview this week that he supported a third-party presidential candidate during the 2008 race that ultimately ended in a win for Barack Obama, a Democrat. This is his quote. A lot of people in 2008 voted for Obama. I did not vote for him. I voted for a third party. But I believed in Obama's promises. I was going to disclose it, but waited because of his election. He continued with the policies of his predecessor. Before Barack Obama won his bid for the White House in 2008, he campaigned on a promise of having the most transparent presidential administration in the history of the United States. Today, his office continues to stand by that vow, despite spearheading an unprecedented war against leakers. The Obama administration has so far charged 7 people under the Espionage Act, and more leakers have been prosecuted under that legislation than by every previous president combined. That's a pretty interesting fact, don't you think? I mean, here he has promised a transparent government, and it's been anything but. And in fact, it's become more totalitarian than any presidential regime before it. And he's already indicted 7 whistleblowers, people that want to make sure that, governments can be this honest exercise between the people and the people that are representing us. Frankly, it's been anything but. Now, astrologically, this is kind of interesting because our friend, Mr. Snowden, was born in 1984. Now, in 1984, Pluto was just going into Scorpio. I think it had been there for about a year. And he was born in the same year as the famous book by George Orwell, 1984. So what we have here is we have somebody who is kind of living out this allegorical hypermythology about blowing the lid on the surveillance state, born in the same year as the book by Orwell, the famous book by Orwell. And he's a Pluto and Scorpio character. He's really at the first few degrees of Pluto and Scorpio. And this is a very interesting generation, which I've written about to a great extent on the website. They're called the Millennials. I call them Generation XXX because they are extreme. They're super extreme in terms of their behavior, their predilections, their ideology, their culture, and their beliefs. Now, there's another side to that generation, which is a very occult generation, Pluto and Scorpio. And we're seeing a lot of their occult symbolism and occult media show up in a really big way. And in fact, it's really being touted as the new religion, to be honest with you. It's Illuminism. It's kind of dime store Illuminism. They wear Aleister Crowley T-shirts, and this has all been popularized by Jay-Z and Rockefeller and Rockaware and all that stuff. And they've got Masonic symbols, and Jay-Z's playing on all of this in order to get people hooked. Symbols hook people, and it's a fashion statement. But it's also a fashion statement that resonates with their psycho-spiritual astrological core, which is Pluto and Scorpio. They don't do things halfway. So Snowden, being a part of this generation, Pluto and Scorpio, has come forward and decided to spill the beans, even if he is a quote-unquote straw man or a fall guy or an agent provocateur, however you want to position him. He's a member of Pluto and Scorpio. Now, there are certain astrologers out there in the world who believe that no matter what a person's affiliation, groups, political, familial, economic, or otherwise, they take a back seat to their astrological designation, meaning that if you're a baby boomer, it doesn't matter whether or not you're playing ball for the Mossad, or you're playing ball for the Rothschilds, or you're playing ball for Rand Corporation, or you're playing ball for Monsanto, or you're playing ball for Microsoft. It doesn't really matter because you're a baby boomer. Those affiliations don't really count. The blanket assertion that you're just a baby boomer is enough because the astrological factotum suggests that you're part of that generation, you're part of the problem. So if we use that logic, then it doesn't really matter, who Edward Snowden is working for or believes in or working against or towards. He's part of Pluto and Scorpio, and he's part of the solution. I don't necessarily agree with that theorem. But I do believe that the Pluto and Scorpio generation is ballsy, and they are going to come forward with more information. This is all coming out, by the way. All these things, all these allegations are coming out during Saturn and Scorpio. Whether it's the IRS, whether it's AP, whether it's Benghazi, it's Saturn and Scorpio. Scorpio is all about secrets. It's all about secrets, and Saturn is compressing the nature of secrecy with Scorpio. That's what's happening. We're seeing it right now, and it's retrograde. Saturn's retrograde. Neptune is now retrograde. So we're going back in time. We're time traveling to figure out what happened, who's making it happen, and what the results are and perhaps will be. This is a very important time in history. You can't slough it off as being some kind of controlled opposition, some kind of gateway maneuver to funnel people into a pen. You can't do that. These things are happening for a reason right now. And it's up to you, again, to determine your own relationship to the material. But it's real. It is as real as astrology, let's put it that way, okay, because it's happening. And it's going to continue to happen. You know, we have coming up here, we have a massive supermoon coming up it's a full moon, right? It's at the end of June. It's going to be a very interesting moon. It's going to be really close to the planet, incredibly close to the planet. And of course, whenever the moon gets close to the planet, you know, we talk about tectonic activity, seismic activity, you know, all that other stuff that goes along with it. Trust me, it'll start to come out. But also with the moon coming that close is, you know, we're getting ready to move into Jupiter in Cancer. And if you look at the tarot card of the moon, it's I think it's one of the most enigmatic cards in the major arcana. And it has to do with the fact that we're basically flying blind. You know, we're like bats in the night, and we're trusting our intuition, and we're trusting our radar to get us from one point to the next. We don't have a map, and we don't have the illumination of the sun. This is not a solar journey. This is a night journey, and we're in it. We're in the night. And some would say we're in the dark night of the soul, collectively and planetarily. So we have to get through this time, and we have to get through using our instincts and our intuition. And this supermoon that's coming up here is revelatory in some ways because of its timeliness and its proximity to the Earth. So what we can infer from it is illumination in the dark, which is an interesting concept because illumination theoretically happens during the light of day. It happens at noon, right? The most illumined time on the face of the Earth is 12 noon. It's high noon. It's the height of the sun. But on the 23rd of June, we're going to get the high lunar moon, or the high lunar noon. And it's going to be a very powerful time. Also at that time, we're going to be able to see the beginnings of Jupiter in Cancer and the beginnings of the grand trine between Jupiter and Neptune and Saturn. And this will be a very profound time. Very, very profound time. Now, internally, I think that there's something going on here. My friend Dave and I, Dave from the show, we were talking yesterday. We're talking about literally two worlds being split off. Because on one level, there's an amazing amount of drama happening in the world. And on another level, there are amazing things happening internally in people's lives. And the more that we disconnect in some ways, not disconnect in a kind of a sociopathological way, so that we're not accountable for our own actions, but more that we disconnect from the drama of the events of the outside world without completely losing track of them, and the more that we focus on our own internal realities, the more that we're able to kind of ride this very interesting wave that is now coming through all of our lives. And at some point, the two realities are just not going to match up at all. They're going to be so distinct and so separate from one another that what people are going to do as a result of that will be quite interesting. I think it already is pretty interesting as it is. But these worlds are going to get further and further apart because the outside world is going to appear as though he's completely mad and operating on a set of rules and principles that just make no sense anymore. Absolutely no sense. And the conflict or the struggle will be how the players that are in what I would call are on the cusp of both worlds, how they deal with it, how they deal with the fulcrum of change. So it's going to be fascinating to watch from a collective point of view. So circle the end of June on your calendars. This is going to be a revelatory, and I mean a revelatory time in many ways. Speaking of revelations, I was watching Mad Men last night. I only have 9 minutes left in the show, so I'm going to riff a little bit about Mad Men. It's an absolutely fascinating show. And I started listening to it. I started watching it about 3 weeks ago. I think it was about 3 weeks or a month ago. And I have it on Netflix. I stayed away from it because I knew I'd get addicted to it. And what happened is I was on AMC and I watched the first episode of this season. It was the first Mad Men episode I'd ever seen, so I had to familiarize myself with all the characters and the backstory. So what I did is I went back into Netflix and I started with season 1 and I watched every episode up until now. So now I'm up to speed. And it's a fascinating program. It's a fascinating treatise in many ways. And what's interesting about it is the character, Don Draper. And there's a ton of Gemini symbolism around Don Draper. And Gemini symbolism, I've been banging on that door for the last couple of years now, but the Gemini symbolism is the symbolism of our world. And it is the tension that sparks between duality that opens up a rift in our consciousness and our awareness. And this was a technique that was employed by Shakespeare at the beginning of his plays. And he would do something at the beginning of his plays where he would separate the viewer, the reader's consciousness. At that time it was the viewer because we were watching his plays being performed. And there would be an event where somebody who was good would do something bad, would throw you for a loop. And then you would have to look at that and you'd be opened up by the experience, and then Shakespeare would pour the rest of the play into your brain. And in a lot of ways, Shakespeare was using trauma-based programming for his plays. And duality relates to trauma-based programming. Because what duality does is it brings us back to our original moments in the dualistic universe and in time, which is the split from God. And so when you have a show like Mad Men that is continually banging on duality as a concept, as a universe of symbols, and also as a mechanism, what it does is it continues to bring about an internal conflict in you, the viewer, so that you're now open to the contents of the rest of the show. Now, I don't know if Matthew Weiner is deliberate about this. I think he might be. And I've done the duality deep dive on a number of different shows and movies to clarify this and to bring it to light. But it's clearly very evident in Mad Men. I mean, just look at Don Draper, right? And look at his secretary. His name is Dawn. Her name is Dawn. He's a man. She's a woman. He's white. She's black. Their names are spelled differently, but he's Dawn. She's Dawn. I mean, this is really very emblematic on a very cursory level of the entire show. He's two people. He's Dick Whitman. He's Don Draper. His Dick Whitman character is born on June 1st, which is the sign of Gemini, right? Up to this point, he's had two wives. He has a third wife, really, which is kind of interesting, even though he was married to her, he had to divorce her, and that is Anna Draper. And I think Anna Draper is probably Lilith. That's my thought. And then there's Eve, who I think is Betty, but then there's the second wife, and that's Megan. And that's an interesting, so we're doing like the triple-headed goddess. So the goddess imagery is also very, very big in Mad Men as well. So this whole Gemini cosmology is very big inside of it. So last night, Don was caught screwing his neighbor by his daughter. Bad move for Don. Looks like Don is potentially going down here. But there's a lot of other stuff that's happening in Mad Men. There's some very clear Luciferic and occult symbolisms and mechanisms driving the Madman engine. Interesting stuff. There's just recently, his wife Megan was wearing a Star T-shirt, right? It was the same T-shirt that was worn by Sharon Tate, who, of course, was murdered by the Manson family. And there's a scene 2 episodes ago where Sally, Dawn's daughter, is reading Rosemary's Baby. And of course, Rosemary's Baby was directed by Roman Polanski. That's right, Roman Polanski. Okay, so that's it for now. Thank you for being a part of the show today and listening. And keep your eyes on Mr. Edward Snowden, Mr. 1984, George Orwell's virtual and illegitimate son. He's a fugitive now, and this is going to occupy the headlines. Meanwhile, the IRS, Benghazi, and all the other events of the day sink slowly towards the background of our consciousness and awareness, as all eyes are trained now on the manhunt, the global manhunt for Edward Snowden, and the drama and trauma that ensues from his probably eventual capture. All right, this is Robert Phoenix. I'll be back on Wednesday with Navigating the Astrological Matrix, and hopefully I will have a guest on who has created a Lemurian-based tarot deck. On Friday, I'll have Charles Osman, and I'm working on a second guest. Charles and I will be talking about technology, the rise of the 3D printer, what it means for you, and the education gap between the state of education for our children today and the world that is coming towards us at light speed, and the type of work they will inherit 10 to 15 years from now. So don't miss this show on Friday with Charles. It's going to be a good one. And my second guest, if they agree to be on the show, will also be, trust me, an exceptional guest. So until then, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to save what's possible. Thanks again for listening. I'm Robert Phoenix. You can find more of me on Facebook and YouTube, where some of these shows end up, and also on my website, robertphoenix.com. Until then, here's Philip Dick, time traveling from the 1970s, telling us all about the reality matrix in which we dwell. I'll see you on Wednesday.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.